The lawyer slid the cashier's check across his mahogany desk, and I stared at those 7 figures until they blurred through my tears. $3.8 million. Behind me, I could hear my grandson's sharp intake of breath, then his girlfriend's whispered curse. They thought I couldn't hear them arguing in the hallway yesterday. That old bat doesn't know what she's doing. The land's worthless. Take whatever we can get. But as I folded that check and tucked it into my worn leather purse, the same one I'd carried for 30 years, I felt something I hadn't felt since Harold died. Power. And the quiet, sweet taste of justice. My name is Margaret Ellen Thornton, and I'm 73 years old. Most folks call me Maggie, though my late husband Harold always called me Peg. I've lived through enough to know that family can hurt you deeper than strangers ever could, and that sometimes the people who think they know you best are the ones who understand you least. This story begins on a Tuesday morning in October when the maples outside my kitchen window were just starting to turn. I was standing at my sink, washing the same coffee cup I'd used every morning for the past 5 years. Harold's favorite, with a chip on the handle that I'd never had the heart to throw away. When my phone rang. "Grandma Maggie?" The voice was strained, impatient. My grandson Tyler calling earlier than usual. At 28, he'd developed that particular tone young people use when they're trying to sound reasonable while delivering unreasonable news. "Morning, sweetheart." I dried my hands on the dish towel, already sensing trouble in the way he'd skipped his usual pleasantries. "Look, we need to talk about the land. The land. 237 acres of Colorado mountain property that Harold's grandfather had homesteaded in 1892. Rolling hills covered in pine and aspen, with a creek running through the southeast corner and views that stretched clear to the Front Range. Harold used to joke that we were land-rich and cash-poor, but he'd said it with pride. That land was our legacy. What about it? I settled into my kitchen chair, the one with the worn cushion that fit the exact shape of my body. "Grandma, you know I love you, right? We all do. But you're not getting any younger, and maintaining that property, it's just not practical anymore." Through my window, I could see Mrs. Patterson from next door wheeling her garbage can to the curb. 86 years old, and still doing for herself. Tyler's words about not getting any younger landed like a slap. I managed just fine. Do you, though? His voice carried that patient tone he used with his toddler. "When's the last time you were up there? The cabin's falling apart, the road's washed out, and the property taxes alone are eating you alive." I paid them in September. Every year for 51 years, Harold and I had scraped together those tax payments. After Harold died, I'd sold my grandmother's pearl necklace to make sure they stayed current. Right, but for how much longer? "Listen, I've been talking to a guy who develops vacation properties. He's interested in buying, and he's offering cash." My hand tightened on the phone. "Buying? It's a good offer, Grandma, really good, considering the condition of everything up there and how remote it is. Honestly, we're lucky anyone wants it at all." The words hit me like cold water. Lucky anyone wants it. Harold's great-grandfather had picked that land because of the water rights, because of the timber, because he could see potential where others saw wilderness. Now my own grandson was talking about it like it was a burden. "How much?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. 43,000. I know it sounds low, but 43,000? I stood up so fast, my chair scraped against the linoleum. "Tyler James Thornton, that land is worth—" "Grandma, please, let me finish. I know you think it's worth more, but that's sentimental value. This guy, he looked at the comparable sales, the access issues, the development costs. The land's basically worthless for anything except maybe hunting, and even then, the liability issues alone. Worthless. The word echoed in my head. Harold had proposed to me on that land, kneeling by the creek where his great-grandfather had built the first water wheel. We'd spent our honeymoon in the cabin his father had expanded, making love on sheets that smelled of pine sap and mountain air. Tyler had taken his first steps on the porch of that same cabin, chasing after a chipmunk while Harold and I watched, laughing. "Who is this buyer?" I managed. "His name's Davidson. He's legitimate, Grandma. I checked him out. He develops luxury camping experiences for rich people from Denver. Glamping, they call it. But here's the thing. He needs an answer by Friday. This kind of cash deal, there are other properties he's looking at. Friday? That's 3 days away. I know it's sudden, but Grandma, this is probably our only shot. Nobody else is going to want land that remote, that undeveloped. And with your health. My health is fine. You had pneumonia last winter. You fell in your garden in July. Mom had to drive you to urgent care because you were too proud to call an ambulance. His voice softened, taking on what I'd learned to recognize as his manipulation tone. We worry about you, all of us. And if something happened to you, and we inherited land we couldn't afford to maintain, so this is about your inheritance. No! God, Grandma, that's not... Look, I'm trying to help you here. I'm trying to make sure you're taken care of. $43,000 would last you years if you invested it properly. You could stop worrying about money, stop trying to keep up with property taxes on land you never even visit anymore. Never visit. Another knife twist. I hadn't been up to the cabin since Harold's funeral. True enough. The drive had become too much for me, and my arthritis made the mountain roads treacherous. But just because I couldn't visit didn't mean I'd stopped loving it. I need to think about this. Of course, but Grandma? Don't think too long. Good offers like this don't come around often. After he hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the mountains I could just make out through my neighbor's cottonwood trees. $43,000. For land that Harold's family had held for 4 generations, for timber rights and water rights and mineral rights that went back to territorial days. Something was very, very wrong. I walked to Harold's old roll-top desk in the living room and pulled out the property file we'd kept since we were married. Tax assessments, survey maps, the original deed with its careful calligraphy and red wax seal. The most recent county assessment, from just 2 years ago, valued the land at $847,000. Raw land, undeveloped, with no improvements except the cabin and outbuildings. $847,000. And my grandson was telling me it was worth $43,000. I reached for the phone book. Yes, I still kept a phone book. And started looking up real estate agents. That's when I realized Tyler had made his first mistake. He'd assumed that because I was old, I was also stupid. He'd forgotten that I'd spent 37 years keeping books for Harold's construction company, that I'd negotiated contracts with suppliers and contractors who tried to cheat us because we were small-town people. He'd forgotten that before I became Harold Thornton's wife, I'd been Margaret Ellen Davies, and the Davies family didn't suffer fools or thieves. As I dialed the first number, my hands were steady as stone. The first real estate agent I called was a woman named Linda Cartwright from Mountain Vista Properties. Her voice was bright and professional when I explained I wanted a current market evaluation on some family land. Of course, Mrs. Thornton. We'd be happy to help. Can you give me the address or parcel number? I read her the legal description from Harold's deed, watching through my window as Mrs. Patterson struggled with a bag of leaves that was clearly too heavy for her. 86 and still too proud to ask for help. I understood that. Oh my. Linda's voice changed, became more focused. Mrs. Thornton, are you familiar with the development that's been proposed for the area adjacent to your property? My pen stopped moving across my notepad. What development? The Aspen Ridge Resort and Conference Center. It's been in the planning stages for about 18 months now. They're proposing a luxury destination resort with a golf course, spa facilities, and high-end vacation homes. Your property would be, well, it would be extremely valuable as part of that development. The kitchen suddenly felt too warm. I set down my pen and pressed my free hand against my chest, where my heart was beginning to hammer. How valuable? Without doing a formal appraisal, I couldn't give you an exact number, but properties in that area with similar acreage and water rights. Mrs. Thornton, we're talking about 7 figures, potentially high 7 figures. 7 figures. I thought about Tyler's voice, so reasonable and patient, explaining how lucky we'd be to get $43,000. Mrs. Thornton, are you still there? I'm here. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. This development. Is it definitely happening? The environmental impact studies are complete, and the County Planning Commission approved it last month. They're just waiting on final state approvals, which are basically a formality at this point. The project is being financed by Henderson Development Group. They're the ones who built that big ski resort up near Vail. Henderson Development Group. I wrote the name down, my handwriting shaky. Mrs. Thornton, if you're considering selling, I'd strongly recommend getting multiple appraisals. And I'd be very careful about any quick sale offers. There are people who, well, let's just say, not everyone in real estate operates with full transparency. After I hung up, I sat staring at my notepad. Henderson Development Group, Aspen Ridge Resort. 7 figures. Tyler knew. He had to know. I called information and got the number for Henderson Development Group. A receptionist with a corporate voice answered on the second ring. Henderson Development. How may I direct your call? I'd like to speak to someone about the Aspen Ridge Resort project. One moment, please. The hold music was some kind of smooth jazz that made my teeth ache. When a man's voice came on the line, it was smooth as that music. This is Charles Davidson, project coordinator for Aspen Ridge. How can I help you? Davidson, the name Tyler had mentioned. Mr. Davidson, my name is Margaret Thornton. I understand you're interested in purchasing some land in the area. A pause. Then, Mrs. Thornton, yes, I've been expecting your call. Your grandson Tyler said you might be reaching out. I hope he's explained our offer to you. He mentioned $43,000. That's right. It's a fair price for raw land in that condition. Of course, we'd need to close quickly. Our financing is contingent on assembling several parcels by the end of the month. Several parcels. What other parcels? Oh, just some adjacent properties. Nothing that would concern you directly. The important thing is that we can offer cash, no contingencies, and a quick close. In this market, Mrs. Thornton, that's quite valuable. His voice had the same reasonable tone Tyler used, but underneath it I heard something else. Impatience. Urgency. I'll need some time to think about it. Of course, but as I mentioned to Tyler, we do need a decision by Friday. This is a time-sensitive opportunity. After I hung up, I walked to Harold's desk and pulled out his, magnifying glass. Then I spread the county survey map across the kitchen table and studied it carefully. Our property was shaped like a puzzle piece, with the creek forming the eastern boundary and county road access on the south. Looking at it now, I could see exactly why Henderson Development would want it. Without our land, their resort would have no direct road access and no water rights. Our property wasn't just valuable, it was essential. I was still studying the map when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Tyler standing on my front porch, looking nervous. Behind him, fidgeting with her phone, was his girlfriend Brittany. She was 26, blonde, and had the kind of restless energy that made me think of a caged animal. Hi, Grandma. Tyler's smile looked forced when I opened the door. We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd stop by. Check on you. How thoughtful. I stepped aside to let them in, noticing how Brittany's eyes immediately went to the survey, map spread across my kitchen table. Researching the family history? Tyler asked, but his voice was too casual. Something like that. I folded the map and set it aside. Can I get you some coffee? Actually, we can't stay long. Brittany spoke for the first time, her voice sharp with what I'd learned to recognize as barely controlled irritation. We just wanted to make sure you understood about the Davidson offer. It really is time-sensitive. Really looked at her. Her purse was new, expensive-looking. Her nails were freshly manicured. The diamond studs in her ears were larger than what Tyler could afford on his salary at the hardware store. Brittany's right, Tyler said. I know $43,000 seems low, but when you factor in the property taxes, the maintenance costs, the liability issues, honestly, Grandma, keeping that land is just throwing money away. Throwing money away. I repeated his words slowly. Like your great-grandfather threw money away when he homesteaded it? That's not what I meant. Like your grandfather threw money away when he built the cabin with his own hands? When he dug the well and ran the power lines and built the road? Tyler's face flushed. Grandma, that was different. That was then. This is now. Yes, I said quietly. This is now. And now I know about the Henderson Development Group and the Aspen Ridge Resort, and the fact that my land is worth considerably more than $43,000. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Brittany stopped fidgeting with her phone. Tyler's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "Who told you that?" Brittany's voice was no longer sharp. It was panicked. "Does it matter?" Tyler found his voice. "Grandma, you don't understand. Those are just rumors. Development plans get proposed all the time, and most of them never happen. You can't base financial decisions on speculation." "Is that what you're doing? Speculating?" "We're trying to help." "Are you?" I walked to the window and looked out at the mountains. "Tyler, how much is Charles Davidson paying you?" Another silence, longer this time. "I don't know what you mean." I turned back to face them. "I think you do." Brittany grabbed Tyler's arm. "We should go." "Yes," I said, "you should." As they reached the door, Tyler turned back. "Grandma, please, don't do anything hasty. Let me set up a meeting with Davidson. Let him explain the offer properly." "No." "What?" I said no. "Tyler, the answer is no." After they left, I stood at my window and watched their car disappear down the street. Then I picked up the phone and called Linda Cartwright back. "Mrs. Cartwright? This is Margaret Thornton again. I'd like to schedule that appraisal as soon as possible. And I'd like to ask you about something else. If someone wanted to pressure an elderly landowner into selling property for far below market value, what would that be called?" "Mrs. Thornton." Linda's voice was very serious now. "That would be called elder financial abuse. And it's a felony." That evening, I did something I hadn't done since Harold died. I poured myself a glass of his good bourbon, the bottle of Maker's Mark he'd been saving for a special occasion that never came. And I sat at his desk to think. The house felt different now, charged with an energy I hadn't felt in years. It was the same feeling I'd had when Harold and I decided to start our own construction company instead of working for someone else's dream. The feeling of taking control. I pulled out Harold's old address book, the leather one with his careful handwriting, and found the number I was looking for. James Patterson, no relation to my neighbor, had been Harold's lawyer for 30 years. He'd handled our business contracts, our wills, and the legal work when Harold's father passed and left us the land. James Patterson Law Office. The voice was crisp, professional. His secretary, even at 7 in the evening. "This is Margaret Thornton. I need to speak with James about some urgent legal matters." "Mrs. Thornton, how are you holding up? Jim's mentioned you several times since Harold's passing." "I'm well, thank you. Is James available?" "Let me check. He's working late tonight on a case." James Patterson was 71, 2 years younger than me, with silver hair and the kind of steady presence that made people trust him immediately. When he came on the line, his voice carried the same warmth it had for 3 decades. "Maggie, what can I do for you?" "James, I need to know about elder financial abuse laws in Colorado, and I may need a lawyer." A pause. "Are you in trouble?" "I think someone's trying to steal my land." "I'll be right over." He arrived 45 minutes later, carrying a briefcase and wearing the same concerned expression he'd worn at Harold's funeral. I made coffee and told him everything. Tyler's call, the Davidson offer, my conversations with Linda Cartwright and Charles. Davidson himself. James listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in his legal pad. When I finished, he set down his pen and looked at me over his reading glasses. "Maggie, what you're describing sounds like a textbook case of financial exploitation. The question is, what's Tyler's role in this? I think he's being paid to convince me to sell. That would make him complicit in a felony." James's voice was grave. "Do you have any proof?" I thought about Brittany's new purse, her diamond earrings, Tyler's sudden urgency about a sale he'd never mentioned before. Nothing concrete. But James, there's something else. When I talked to Davidson today, he said he was expecting my call. He said Tyler told him I might be reaching out. How would Tyler know I'd call Davidson unless they'd already discussed it? James made another note. "Good point. What else?" "Davidson mentioned they need to assemble several parcels by the end of the month. He made it sound like my land was just one piece of a larger puzzle." It probably is. Large developments like this usually require assembling multiple properties. The developers often use intermediaries to approach landowners separately, so no one realizes how valuable their piece really is. So Tyler could be working for them? It's possible. Or he could be working with someone who is. Either way, if he's receiving compensation for pressuring you to sell below market value, he's committed a crime. James opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. I want you to sign these documents. They'll give me power of attorney to investigate this matter on your behalf and to communicate with any potential buyers. Don't sign anything Tyler or Davidson present to you without my review. As I signed the papers, James continued talking. I'm also going to recommend you hire a private investigator. If Tyler is receiving money from Davidson or Henderson Development, there will be a paper trail. How much will all this? Don't worry about that right now. If we can prove financial exploitation, you may be entitled to damages beyond the actual value of your property. After James left, I sat in Harold's chair and thought about my grandson. I remembered teaching him to fish in the creek that ran through our land. He was 7, maybe 8, and kept getting frustrated when the fish wouldn't bite. Harold had laughed and told him patience was the most important part of fishing. The fish will come when they're ready, son. Your job is to be prepared when they do. Now Tyler was the fish, and he was coming to me with an offer that stank like day-old trout. But I would be prepared. The next morning, I called Linda Cartwright and asked her to expedite the appraisal. Then I called the private investigator James had recommended, a woman named Sarah Chen, who specialized in financial crimes. Mrs. Thornton? Sarah's voice was businesslike but kind. Mr. Patterson explained the situation. I can start immediately, but I need you to understand that investigations take time. If your grandson is receiving payments, I'll find them, but it might take a few days. How long do you need? Give me 48 hours to start. I'll have preliminary findings by Thursday morning. Thursday morning. Tyler's deadline with Davidson was Friday. That's cutting it close. Mrs. Thornton, from what Mr. Patterson told me, the urgency is artificial. These developers have been planning this project for 18 months. They don't need your answer by Friday. They want it by Friday. There's a difference. After I hung up, I realized I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Purpose. For the first time since Harold died, I had something important to do. I was making lunch when the phone rang again. This time it was my daughter Rebecca, Tyler's mother, calling from Phoenix, where she lived with her second husband. Mom, Tyler called me. He's worried about you. Is he? He said you're being stubborn about selling the land. Mom, maybe you should listen to him. That property has been nothing but an expense since Dad died. Rebecca had never understood the land. Even as a child, she'd complained about the long drive to the cabin, about the lack of television, about having to use an outhouse because Harold refused to install indoor plumbing in what he called his wilderness retreat. Rebecca, when's the last time you talked to Tyler about money? What do you mean? Has he seemed to have more money lately? New purchases, expensive gifts for that girlfriend of his? Mom, what are you getting at? Just answer the question. A pause. Well, he did mention he was doing some consulting work on the side, real estate stuff. But Mom, what does that have to do with anything? Real estate consulting. I felt a cold anger settling in my chest. Rebecca, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I am not going to sell the land. Not to Davidson, not to anyone else Tyler might suggest. That land belongs to our family, and it's going to stay in our family. But Mom? No buts. And Rebecca? If Tyler is taking money to pressure me into selling family property, he's going to face the consequences, legal consequences. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. After Rebecca hung up, she actually hung up on me, her own mother. I sat in my kitchen and felt something shift inside me. For months, I'd been the grieving widow, the elderly mother everyone worried about, the burden everyone had to manage. But I wasn't a burden. I was Margaret Ellen Thornton, and I came from people who had carved a life out of wilderness with nothing but determination and stubborn pride. The phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Tyler's number. Grandma, I just talked to Mom. She said you're upset about something? I'm not upset, Tyler. I'm angry. About what? About the fact that you've been lying to me. About the fact that you're trying to steal my land. About the fact that you're taking money to betray your own family. Grandma, I don't know what you think you know, but I know that Charles Davidson was expecting my call because you told him I'd be calling. I know that Henderson Development needs my land for their resort project. I know that my property is worth considerably more than $43,000. And I know that you're being paid to convince me otherwise. The silence stretched so long I wondered if he'd hung up. Grandma. His voice was different now, smaller. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. I can't. Not over the phone. Then come over here, now, and bring your girlfriend. And Tyler, bring whatever paperwork Davidson gave you. All of it. Grandma. 1 hour, Tyler. If you're not here in 1 hour, I'm calling the police. I hung up and looked at the clock. 3:15 in the afternoon. By 4:15, I'd know exactly how deep this betrayal went. And then I'd decide what to do about it. Tyler arrived at 4:13, 3 minutes before my deadline. Brittany wasn't with him. He stood on my porch looking like a man facing a firing squad, holding a manila envelope that seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. Come in? I stepped aside, noting how he avoided my eyes. He followed me to the kitchen table, where I'd spread out Harold's survey maps again. The sight of them seemed to make him shrink even smaller. Sit down. He sat. I remained, standing, looking down at this young man I'd helped raise, this boy I'd taught to drive in Harold's old pickup truck, this grandson who'd called me every Sunday for the past 5 years just to check on me. Where's Brittany? She didn't want to come. Smart girl. This conversation could land her in prison too. Tyler's head snapped up. Prison? Elder financial abuse is a felony in Colorado, Tyler. Did you know that? His face went white. Grandma, please, let me explain. I'm listening. He set the manila envelope on the table, but didn't open it. His hands were shaking. It started 6 months ago. Brittany and we got into some trouble. What kind of trouble? Financial trouble. Credit cards, mostly. And her student loans. We owed about $30,000, and the interest was killing us. I was working overtime at the hardware store, but it wasn't enough. I said nothing. Just waited. Then this guy approached me at Mulligan's bar one night. Said his name. Was Rick Stevens, that he worked for a development company. Said they were interested in some properties in the area where our family land is. Henderson Development? Tyler nodded. He knew about our land, knew about the water rights, the access road, everything. He said they needed it for a project, but they were having trouble reaching the owner. They were having trouble reaching me? That's what he said. He asked if I knew you, if I could maybe facilitate a meeting. For how much? Tyler's voice dropped to almost a whisper. $5,000, just to set up a meeting. $5,000. I thought about the years Harold and I had scraped together $500 for Christmas presents. I thought about the winter we'd eaten beans and rice for 2 months, so we could make the property tax payment. And then? The meeting was supposed to be casual, just Rick and me having coffee with you, talking about how the land was getting expensive to maintain, how maybe it would be good to sell before property taxes went up even more. But I never met this Rick Stevens, because they changed the plan. Tyler finally opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of papers. After they ran the numbers, they realized you'd never sell if you knew what the land was really worth. So they decided to make a direct offer, low enough that you'd think you were getting fair value for worthless property. And your job was to convince me to take it. They said you'd be happier not knowing about the development, that you'd worry about noise and construction, about strangers on the mountain. They said it was better for everyone if you just thought you were selling to some rich guy who wanted to go hunting. The rationalization in his voice made my stomach turn. Tyler, how much did they pay you to betray me? He pulled out a bank statement and slid it across the table. I put on my reading glasses and looked at the deposits. $5,000 6 months ago. Another $5,000 3 months ago. And then, just last week, $15,000. $25,000, more than half of what they'd offered me for land worth nearly $1 million. The $15,000, Tyler's voice cracked. That was supposed to be my commission when you signed the papers. Your commission. Grandma, please understand. We were desperate. Brittany was talking about leaving me because of the debt. My credit was ruined. I couldn't get a loan, couldn't qualify for a mortgage. This money, it saved my life. I looked at my grandson, really looked at him. At some point in the last 5 years, the earnest young man who'd helped Harold repair the cabin roof had become someone I didn't recognize. Someone who could take money to steal from his own grandmother. Tyler, do you know what your great-great-grandfather did for a living before he homesteaded that land? He shook his head. He was a teacher. Made $30 a month in a one-room schoolhouse. In Kansas. It took him 4 years to save enough money to buy supplies and make the trip to Colorado Territory. 4 years of living on nothing but beans and hope because he believed that land would give his children a better life. Tyler wouldn't meet my eyes. Your great-grandfather worked 16-hour days clearing trees and digging irrigation ditches. He built that cabin with a broken back and arthritic hands because he believed that land was worth more than money. It was worth legacy. Grandma, your grandfather fought in 2 wars to protect what his family had built. He came home from Korea with shrapnel in his leg and nightmares that lasted 40 years. But he never once considered selling that land, even when we couldn't afford groceries. My voice was rising now, and I didn't care. And you sold it for $25,000. I haven't sold anything yet. You haven't signed the papers. But you would have let me. You would have sat there and watched me sign away. Everything your family worked for, everything they died for $43,000, while you pocketed $25,000 in blood money. Tyler's face crumpled. Grandma, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know it would feel like this. I thought it would be easier. Easier? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You thought stealing from your grandmother would be easier? I thought you'd be happy. I thought you'd be relieved to get rid of the burden. I sat down across from him, suddenly feeling every one of my 73 years. Tyler, that land isn't a burden. It's who we are. It's the reason your grandfather could start his own business instead of working for someone else his whole life. It's the reason your mother could go to college. It's the reason you grew up in a house instead of a trailer park. I know that now. Do you really? Tyler pulled another paper from the envelope. This is the contract Davidson wanted. You to sign. Look at the deadline clause. I read the paragraph he was pointing to. If I didn't sign by Friday, the offer would be withdrawn permanently. But there was a second clause I hadn't seen before. If the seller attempts to negotiate terms or seek additional offers, this agreement becomes null and void. I looked up at Tyler. They didn't want me to get other appraisals. Rick said if you started talking to other real estate agents, they'd pull the offer and move on to other properties. He said Henderson Development had backup options because they knew I'd find out what the land was really worth. Tyler nodded miserably. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains that held our family's history. Tyler, what did you plan to tell me after the sale went through, when the resort opened and I saw what my land had become? I don't know. I thought maybe you'd never find out, or you thought I'd be dead. Grandma! I turned back to face him. I'm 73 years old, Tyler. I had pneumonia last winter. In your mind, I was probably going to die before I ever found out how badly you'd cheated me. That's not true, isn't it? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, Tyler spoke, his voice barely audible. What are you going to do? I looked at this young man who carried Harold's eyes and my stubborn chin, this grandson who had just tried to steal my legacy for the price of a used car. I don't know yet, I said. But Tyler, you're going to help me figure it out. What do you mean? I smiled for the first time since this conversation began. It wasn't a kind smile. You're going to call Rick Stevens and tell him I've decided to accept Davidson's offer. You're going to arrange a meeting for tomorrow morning, here at my house, to sign the papers. Grandma, you can't. And then I continued. You're going to sit right here at this table and watch me destroy Charles Davidson, the same way he tried to destroy me. Tyler's mouth fell open. You're not really going to sell, are you? Oh, sweetheart, I said, reaching over to pat his cheek the way I had when he was 5 years old and had broken one of my good china plates. You have no idea what your grandmother is capable of. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was worried, but because I was planning. I sat at Harold's desk with a legal pad, making lists and drawing diagrams like he used to do before big construction jobs. Harold, always, said the secret to winning wasn't being stronger or faster than your opponent. It was being better prepared. At 6 a.m, I called Sarah Chen, the private investigator. Mrs. Thornton, you're up early. I need to know what you've found. Everything. I was going to call you this morning anyway. Mrs. Thornton, your grandson has received payments totaling $25,000 from a company called Mountain Vista Consulting. That company is owned by Henderson Development Group. Can you prove it? Bank records, deposit slips, even a contract with Tyler's signature. Mrs. Thornton, this is a clear case of conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse. The DA would prosecute this in a heartbeat. What about Charles Davidson? Rick Stevens, the man who initially approached your grandson, is Davidson's nephew. This whole operation was coordinated from the top down. They've done this before, Mrs. Thornton. In the past 3 years, Henderson Development has acquired 12 properties this way, always targeting elderly landowners, always using family members as intermediaries. 12 properties, 12 families destroyed by greed. Are you ready to file charges? Not yet, I said. I want to meet with Davidson first. Mrs. Thornton, I wouldn't recommend... Sarah, I want you to be here for that meeting, hidden but recording everything. Can you do that? A pause. Yes. But why? Because I want Charles Davidson to confess to everything before I destroy him. 8 o'clock. Tyler called to confirm that Davidson would arrive at 10. His voice was hollow, defeated. Good. He was finally understanding the magnitude of what he'd done. Grandma, I've been thinking all night. Maybe we should just tell Davidson the deal is off. Maybe I should give the money back and we can pretend this never happened. No, Tyler. We're way past pretending. But if you're planning something that could get you in trouble, sweetheart, the only person who's going to be in trouble after today is Charles Davidson. And maybe you, depending on how cooperative you decide to be. At 9:30, Sarah Chen arrived at my back door. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with intelligent eyes and the kind of quiet confidence that reminded me of myself at that age. She set up a tiny recording device in my china cabinet and showed me how to activate it. Just press this button when Davidson starts talking. Try to get him to admit that he knew the land was worth more than his offer and that he paid Tyler to pressure you. Don't worry, I said. Men like Charles Davidson can't resist bragging about how clever they are. At exactly 10 o'clock, a black Mercedes pulled into my driveway. Through my window, I watched Charles Davidson emerge from the driver's seat. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 50, with the kind of aggressive good looks that probably served him well in business. He wore an expensive suit and carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than Tyler made in a month. Tyler met him at the door. I could see them talking on my front porch, Davidson gesturing confidently, while Tyler looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. When they came inside, Davidson's smile was all teeth and no warmth. Mrs. Thornton, Charles Davidson, so pleased to finally meet you. He held out his hand, and I shook it briefly. His grip was too firm, trying to establish dominance. Mr. Davidson, please sit down. He took the chair, across from me at the kitchen table, setting his briefcase beside him with theatrical precision. Tyler sat at the far end, looking like he was attending his own execution. I have to say, Mrs. Thornton, Tyler's told me wonderful things about you. It's clear he cares deeply about your well-being. I pressed the button on Sarah's recording device. Yes, Tyler's always been concerned about my well-being. Exactly. And that's why this transaction makes so much sense for everyone involved. You get a fair price for property that's become a burden. Tyler gets peace of mind, knowing you're financially secure, and my clients get a nice piece of mountain property for their hunting retreat. Hunting retreat? Oh yes, very exclusive. Just a few friends who enjoy getting away from the city, doing some elk hunting, maybe a little fishing. Nothing that would disturb the natural character of the area. The lies rolled off his tongue like water. I marveled at how smoothly he delivered them, how he made himself sound like some kind of conservationist instead of a developer planning to build a luxury resort. That sounds lovely, I said. Though I have to ask, $43,000 seems quite generous for land that's so remote and undeveloped. Davidson's smile flickered just slightly. Well, as I mentioned to Tyler, we're in a position to pay cash quickly. In today's market, that convenience has real value. I'm sure it does. Tell me, Mr. Davidson, how did you first learn about my property? Oh, we do a lot of research in the area. Public records, that sort of thing. When we saw your land had the water rights and road access we needed, Tyler was kind enough to reach out to us. Tyler reached out to you? Davidson glanced at Tyler, who was staring at his hands. Well, I believe one of our associates approached Tyler initially, but Tyler was the one who suggested this might be a good time for you to consider selling. I nodded thoughtfully. Because of my age, you mean? Because of the practical considerations. As we get older, managing remote property becomes more challenging. Certainly. And Tyler mentioned you need a decision today? Unfortunately, yes. Our financing is contingent on closing several transactions by month's end. If we can't secure your property, we'll need to look at alternative locations. Alternative locations for your hunting retreat? Exactly. I stood up and walked to Harold's desk, pulling out the folder James Patterson had prepared for me yesterday. Davidson watched me with the focused attention of a predator tracking wounded prey. Mr. Davidson, I've lived a long time, and I've learned that when something sounds too good to be true, it usually is. His smile became more forced. I'm not sure what you mean. I mean that yesterday I had my property appraised by a licensed real estate professional. According to her evaluation, my land is worth approximately $847,000. The color drained from Davidson's face. Tyler's head snapped up, his eyes wide. Mrs. Thornton, I think there's been some misunderstanding. I also learned about the Aspen Ridge Resort and Conference Center. Quite an ambitious project. Golf course, spa, luxury homes, very different from a hunting retreat. Davidson's hand moved toward his briefcase, then stopped. I don't know anything about... Of course you do. You're the project coordinator. I called Henderson Development yesterday and spoke with you myself. That was a different... No, Mr. Davidson. That was you. And this... I held up the papers James had prepared. Is a cease and desist order preventing you from contacting me or any member of my family about the sale of my property. Davidson stood up abruptly. Mrs. Thornton, I think you're making a serious mistake. Am I? Because I also have evidence that you paid my grandson $25,000 to pressure me into accepting your fraudulent offer. That's called elder financial abuse, Mr. Davidson. It's a felony. I don't know what Tyler has told you, but Tyler didn't tell me anything. A private investigator told me. The same investigator who's been documenting your pattern of targeting elderly landowners throughout Colorado. Davidson's composure finally cracked. You can't prove anything. Actually, I can. Bank records, contracts, recorded phone conversations. Mr. Davidson, you've just confessed to attempted fraud while being recorded by a licensed private investigator who's sitting in my pantry. Silence that followed was absolute. Davidson's face went through several interesting color changes, settling on a shade of gray that matched his expensive suit. You recorded me? I did indeed. Just like you trained Tyler to manipulate me, I've spent the last 2 days learning how to manipulate you. The difference is, my manipulation was legal. Davidson grabbed his briefcase and headed for the door. This isn't over. Oh, but it is, I called after him. And Mr. Davidson, the next time you want to steal someone's land, make sure their grandson isn't stupid enough to keep bank statements documenting your bribes. After Davidson left, Tyler and I sat in my kitchen, listening to the sound of his Mercedes speeding down my street. Sarah Chen emerged from the pantry, grinning like she'd just won the lottery. Mrs. Thornton, that was beautiful. We have enough here to put Davidson away and shut down his entire operation. Tyler finally found his voice. Grandma, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. I looked at him. This young man who'd tried to sell my legacy for pocket change, who was now seeing me clearly for perhaps the first time in his adult life. Tyler, I said quietly, being sorry isn't enough. But it's a start. What happens now? Now we decide what kind of man you're going to be. The kind who runs away from his mistakes, or the kind who stays and fixes them. I want to fix them. I want to make this right. Good, I said, because we're not done yet. The next morning, my kitchen was busier than it had been since Harold's funeral. James Patterson sat at one end of my table, with legal documents spread before him like battle plans. Sarah Chen occupied the other end, her laptop open to bank records and recorded conversations. Tyler sat in the middle, looking like a defendant waiting for sentencing. At 10 o'clock sharp, Detective Maria Santos from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department arrived with a briefcase of her own. She was a woman about Rebecca's age, with graying hair and the kind of steady presence that reminded me of Harold. Mrs. Thornton, I've reviewed the evidence Ms. Chen provided. We have enough to charge Charles Davidson and Henderson Development Group with multiple felonies: elder financial abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and racketeering. What about my grandson? Tyler's face went white, but Detective Santos looked at him with something that might have been sympathy. That depends on his level of cooperation. If he's willing to testify against Davidson and help us build a case against the other victims, the DA might consider a plea agreement. Other victims? Sarah opened her laptop and turned it toward me. Mrs. Thornton, we've identified 11 other elderly landowners who've been targeted by this operation in the past 3 years. Most of them sold for a fraction of their land's value. Combined, Henderson Development has stolen approximately $12 million in property value. $12 million. Stolen from people like me, people who trusted their families and believed in simple handshake honesty. What happened to them? Evictions, mostly. Once Henderson took ownership, they discovered development issues that required the previous owners to vacate any homes or cabins on the property. Some of these people lost their homes along with their land. The coffee I'd been drinking turned bitter in my mouth. And their families, the ones who helped Davidson steal from them? Most of them used the money to pay off debts or make down payments on new houses. They moved on with their lives while their grandparents lost everything. Tyler made a sound like a wounded animal. Oh God, I almost did that to you. Yes, I said quietly. You almost did. Detective Santos leaned forward. Mrs. Thornton, we'd like to set up a sting operation. With your permission, we'd like you to call Davidson and tell him you're reconsidering. We think we can get him to incriminate himself further. No. Everyone looked at me in surprise. No, Detective, I have a better idea. I walked to Harold's desk and pulled out a folder I'd been working on since 6 that morning. Inside were copies of land deeds, mineral rights documents, and water rights certificates dating back to 1892. James, I want you to draw up papers to donate my land to the Colorado State Parks Department. Maggie, that's very generous, but as a nature preserve, with the stipulation that it can never be developed, never be sold, and never be removed from public protection. Tyler's jaw dropped. You're giving it away? I'm making sure it can never be stolen, not by Davidson, not by Henderson Development, and not by any future Tyler who might decide family legacy is worth less than his credit card payments. James was making notes. Maggie, you could sell it to the state instead of donating it. Get fair market value. I don't want the money, James. I want justice. I want Henderson Development. To know that their 1.5 years of planning, their bribes, their manipulation of families, all of it was for nothing. Sarah was grinning again. Mrs. Thornton, do you realize what this will do to their entire project? Tell me. Without your land, they have no road access and no water rights. The entire Aspen Ridge development becomes worthless. They'll lose their investment, their planning permits, probably their financing. You're not just protecting your land, you're destroying their Tire operation. Good. Detective Santos looked impressed. And if we time the donation to coincide with the arrests, the media coverage will expose Henderson Development's practices to every potential victim in the state. Even better. Tyler was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Grandma, you're giving away almost $1 million. Tyler, your great-grandfather didn't homestead that land to make money. He did it to leave something permanent for his family. Well, now it will be permanent forever. But the taxes alone on $1 million will be someone else's problem, the state's problem. I sat back down across from him. Tyler, do you know what your grandfather's favorite part of that land was? He shook his head. The creek. He used to sit by that creek every evening when we stayed at the cabin, just listening to the water. He said it was the same water his grandfather had listened to, and someday it would be the same water his great-grandchildren would listen to. He wasn't thinking about property values or development potential. He was thinking about continuity. Tyler's voice was barely a whisper. And I almost destroyed that. Yes, you did. James finished his notes and looked up. Maggie, I'll need a few days to prepare the donation paperwork. The state will require environmental assessments, surveys. How long? 2 weeks, maybe 3. Too long. Detective Santos, how soon can you arrest Davidson? We could take him into custody this afternoon. Do it. And I want Tyler there when it happens. Tyler's head snapped up. What? You're going to call Davidson and set up another meeting. Tell him I've changed my mind, that I want to proceed with the sale. When he arrives with the contracts, Detective Santos will be waiting. Grandma, I can't. Yes, you can, and you will. Because Tyler, this is the only way you're going to understand what you really did to me. You need to look Charles Davidson in the eye when he's arrested for trying to steal from your grandmother. You need to see what happens to people who prey on the elderly. Detective Santos nodded approvingly. It would be helpful to have Tyler make the call. Davidson might be suspicious if Mrs. Thornton contacts him directly after yesterday's confrontation. Tyler was shaking. What if he doesn't believe me? He'll believe you, I said. Because men like Charles Davidson can't imagine that people like me are smarter than they are. He'll think I'm just a confused old woman who's been talked back into submission by her concerned grandson. But after he's arrested, what happens to me? Detective Santos answered. If you cooperate fully, testify in Davidson's trial, help us identify other victims, return the money you received, the DA will probably offer you a plea agreement. Community service, restitution, probation, no jail time? That depends on how valuable your cooperation is. I stood up and walked to the phone, picking up the receiver and holding it out to Tyler. Call him. Tyler took the phone with trembling hands and dialed Davidson's number. We all listened as it rang. Charles Davidson. Mr. Davidson? It's Tyler Thornton. Tyler, I have to say, I'm disappointed in how yesterday went. I know, but Mr. Davidson, I think I can fix this. My grandmother, she was upset yesterday, but she's calmed down. She's ready to listen to reason. Is she now? Tyler's voice grew more confident. I had to admit, he was a better liar than I'd expected. She realizes she may have overreacted. She's willing to meet with you again. Sign the papers if you're still interested. A long pause. Tyler, after yesterday's theatrics, my clients are concerned about Mrs. Thornton's stability. She's fine. She just got scared when she heard about the development. But I explained that it's just a hunting lodge, that it won't affect her at all since she'll be moving anyway. And she believed you? She wants to believe me. Mr. Davidson, she's 73 years old. She's tired. She just wants this to be over. Another pause. When? This afternoon? Say, 3 o'clock? Tyler, if this is some kind of setup, it's not, I promise. She just wants to sign the papers and move on with her life. All right, 3 o'clock. But Tyler, this is the last chance. If your grandmother changes her mind again, she won't. I guarantee it. After Tyler hung up, Detective Santos was already on her radio, calling for backup units. Sarah was packing up her equipment, preparing to document Davidson's final downfall. Mrs. Thornton, James said, I have to ask, Are you sure about the donation? Once the papers are filed, you can't change your mind. I looked around my kitchen at these people who were helping me reclaim my dignity, my family's honor, my faith in justice. Then I looked at Tyler, who was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what we'd almost lost. James, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Tyler looked up at me, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Grandma, after today, after Davidson's arrested and this is all over, will you ever be able to forgive me? I thought about Harold, about his grandfather who'd carved a life from wilderness, about the generations of our family who'd protected that land so it could be passed down to Tyler. I thought about trust betrayed and lessons learned, and the difference between earning forgiveness and deserving it. Tyler, I said finally, forgiveness isn't something I can give you. It's something you're going to have to earn. How? By becoming the kind of man your great-great-grandfather would have been proud to call family. Outside, I could hear the first police cars arriving, parking discreetly up the street where Davidson wouldn't see them when he arrived. In 3 hours, Charles Davidson would discover that he'd underestimated the wrong grandmother. But more importantly, in 3 hours, Tyler would discover who he really wanted to be. At exactly 3 o'clock, Charles Davidson's black Mercedes pulled into my driveway for the second time in 2 days. This time, I watched from my living room window as he emerged from the car, his movements confident and predatory. He had no idea that Detective Santos and 3 backup officers were positioned around my house, or that Sarah Chen was recording everything from my guest bedroom. Tyler sat beside me on Harold's old sofa, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. Can't believe he's coming. After yesterday, I thought he'd be too suspicious. Men like Davidson are blinded by their own arrogance, I said. He can't imagine that a 73-year-old grandmother might outsmart him. The doorbell rang. Tyler started to stand, but I put my hand on his arm. Remember, you're supposed to have convinced me to sell. You're the dutiful grandson who talked sense into his stubborn grandmother. Can you do that? Tyler's jaw tightened with resolve. I can do that. We walked to the door together. When I opened it, Davidson's smile was just as predatory as before, but now I could see the uncertainty behind it. Mrs. Thornton. Tyler. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room as if looking for hidden threats. I have to say I'm pleased you've reconsidered. Well, I said, settling into my kitchen chair. Tyler helped me understand that I may have been emotional yesterday. Sometimes when you reach my age, change becomes frightening. Davidson's shoulders relaxed slightly. Of course, it's perfectly natural. That's why it's so important to have family members like Tyler looking out for your best interests. Tyler sat down across from Davidson, and I watched my grandson's face carefully. He was playing his part, but I could see the disgust in his eyes as Davidson praised him for looking out for my best interests. Shall we proceed with the paperwork? Davidson opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick contract. I've taken the liberty of preparing everything. You just need to sign here, here, and here. He pointed to signature lines marked with yellow sticky notes. Of course, I said. But first, I'd like to understand exactly what happens after I sign. Well, as I mentioned, we'll close within 30 days. You'll receive your $43,000, and my clients will take possession of the property. And then? Davidson's smile flickered. Then they'll use it for their hunting retreat, as we discussed. I nodded, thoughtfully. Mr. Davidson, can I ask you something? In all your years of real estate development, have you ever felt guilty about paying someone far less than their property was worth? The question hung in the air like smoke. Davidson's face went very still. I'm not sure what you mean, Mrs. Thornton. I think you do. I think you know exactly what I mean. Davidson glanced at Tyler, who was staring at him with undisguised contempt. Tyler, perhaps you could explain to your grandmother. Tyler's not going to explain anything, I said quietly, because Tyler isn't working for you anymore. Davidson started to stand, but Tyler spoke for the first time since they'd arrived. Sit down, Mr. Davidson. Excuse me? I said sit down. Tyler's voice was steady now, filled with the authority I'd never heard from him before. You're going to answer my grandmother's questions. Davidson remained standing, his hand moving toward his briefcase. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. If you're not ready to proceed." "Oh, we're ready to proceed," I said. "Detective Santos, I think Mr. Davidson is ready to meet you now." The look on Davidson's face when Detective Santos emerged from my hallway was worth every sleepless hour I'd spent planning this moment. Pure shock, followed by the dawning realization that he'd been outmaneuvered by the same confused old woman he'd tried to cheat. "Charles Davidson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse, fraud, and racketeering." Detective Santos's voice was crisp and professional as she read him his rights. Davidson's composure finally shattered completely. "You can't prove anything. This is entrapment." "Actually," Sarah Chen said, emerging from the guest bedroom with her recording equipment, "we can prove quite a lot. We have documented evidence of your conspiracy targeting 12 elderly victims across Colorado. We have bank records showing payments to intermediaries like Tyler. And now we have recorded evidence of you attempting to complete a fraudulent transaction." As Detective Santos handcuffed Davidson, he turned to Tyler with desperate fury. "You son of a bitch! We had a deal!" Tyler stood up slowly, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, he looked like the man I'd raised him to be. "We did. The same kind of deal you made with 11 other families before mine. The same kind of deal that destroyed their lives while you got rich." Tyler's voice was steady, but I could see his hands shaking. "The difference is, my grandmother is smarter than both of us." As they led Davidson away, he shouted threats and accusations, but his words sounded hollow and pathetic. The Mercedes would be impounded as evidence. The contracts would be shredded. The great Charles Davidson was just another criminal in handcuffs. After the police left, Tyler and I sat in my kitchen, in silence, for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "Grandma, watching him get arrested, seeing what I almost became..." His voice broke. "How do I live with this?" "The same way anyone lives with their mistakes," I said. "One day at a time, trying to do better. I keep thinking about those other families, the ones who actually sold to him. Their grandchildren are living in houses bought with stolen money, and their grandparents lost everything." "Yes, they did." Tyler looked up at me. What if I testified against not just Davidson, but against the other family members who took his money? What if I helped those victims get justice too? The district attorney would probably be very interested in that cooperation. "And the money I took from Davidson, I'm giving it all back, even if it means declaring bankruptcy, every penny." I studied my grandson's face, looking for the selfish young man who'd sat at this same table 2 days ago trying to convince me to sell my heritage for pocket change. I didn't see him anymore. "Tyler, do you remember what your grandfather used to say? About mistakes? That they were only mistakes if you didn't learn from them. And what have you learned?" Tyler was quiet for a long moment. "That there are some things more important than money. That family isn't just about blood. It's about honor. And that trust, once broken, has to be earned back with actions, not words." 3 weeks later, James Patterson called to tell me the land donation had been approved. The Harold Thornton Nature Preserve would be officially dedicated the following month, with 237 acres of Colorado mountain wilderness protected forever from development. 2 months after that, Tyler's testimony helped convict not only Charles Davidson, but 6 other family members who'd taken bribes to pressure their elderly relatives into fraudulent sales. The victims recovered nearly $8 million in damages. Tyler declared bankruptcy, as he'd promised. He and Brittany broke up. Apparently, she wasn't interested in dating someone who'd chosen integrity over financial security. He moved into a small apartment and took a second job to pay restitution. Every Sunday, he called me to check in, and every other Sunday, he drove to the nature preserve to maintain the hiking trails as part of his community service. 6 months after Davidson's arrest, Tyler knocked on my door carrying a small wrapped package. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it." Inside was a photograph of Harold and me, taken at the cabin during our 40th wedding anniversary. We were sitting by the creek, Harold's arm around my shoulders, both of us laughing at something our photographer, Tyler himself, had said to make us smile. I found it in my old photo albums, Tyler said. I thought maybe you'd like to have it. I looked at the photo, remembering that day. Harold had been sick already, though we didn't know it yet. The cancer wouldn't be diagnosed for another year. But in this moment, captured by our teenage grandson, we were simply happy. Tyler, this is beautiful, but why are you giving it to me now? Because I finally understand what you saved. Not just the land, but what the land represents. Family, legacy, the idea that some things are more valuable than money. He paused. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Grandma. I'm just asking you to know that I finally understand what I almost destroyed. I looked at this young man who'd tried to steal my legacy and had instead learned what legacy truly means. Then I walked to Harold's desk and pulled out a manila envelope. What's that? The deed to my house. I handed him the envelope. I'm moving to Sunset Manor next month. I've decided I'm too old to maintain this big place by myself. Tyler's eyes widened. Grandma, you can't give me your house, not after what I did. I'm not giving it to you, I said. I'm selling it to you. For $1 and the promise that you'll never again put money ahead of family. Tyler stared at the deed, then at me. I can't accept this. You can. And you will. Because Tyler, this house is where your grandfather proposed to me. It's where your mother took her first steps. It's where you learned to ride a bicycle in the driveway. It needs to stay in the family. But the trust will be earned back over time. Some gifts aren't about what you deserve, Tyler. They're about what you might become. 6 months later, I sat in my sunny apartment at Sunset Manor, reading a newspaper article about Henderson Development Group's bankruptcy. Charles Davidson had been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. The Aspen Ridge Resort project had been permanently canceled, but the headline that made me smile was smaller, buried on page 6 of the local section. Local man leads effort to protect elderly from property fraud. The article featured a photograph of Tyler speaking at a community center, educating seniors about the warning signs of real estate scams. He'd started a nonprofit organization called Thornton Family Protection Services, using his experience as both a victim and a perpetrator to help other families avoid the mistakes he'd made. That evening, Tyler called as he did every Sunday. Grandma, I have news. The City Council wants to expand the fraud prevention program statewide. They're offering me a position as a full-time coordinator. And I'm going to take it. The pay isn't much, but the work, it feels important. Maybe I can make up for some of the damage I caused. Through my apartment window, I could see the mountains where Harold's great-grandfather had first claimed our family's land, where Harold and I had built our dreams, where Tyler had learned the difference between price and value. Tyler, I said, your great-grandfather would be proud of you. Do you really think so? I know so. And Tyler? So am I. After I hung up, I sat in my chair and thought about legacy. Not the kind you leave behind in bank accounts or property deeds, but the kind you build in the choices you make, the lessons you learn, and the person you decide to become after you've lost your way. Harold's land would be protected forever. Our house would remain in the family, and my grandson had learned that some things, honor, integrity, family, are worth more than all the money Charles Davidson could ever have offered. At 73, I'd discovered something I thought I'd lost when Harold died, the power to shape the future. Not through money or property, but through love tough enough to demand accountability and wise enough to offer redemption. Sometimes the best inheritance you can leave isn't what you give to your family. It's what you teach them to value. And sometimes the most worthless thing in the world turns out to be worth everything.